as we focus in on our Torah reading, which marks transition, as we are in a moment of transition on January 2nd. Parsha Vayechi seems well chosen. Vayechi, which means "and he lived," deals with death. In this case, the impending death of Jacob, which will draw the book of Genesis to a conclusion. Not just Jacob, but also Joseph. Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim, and Jacob lived in the land of Egypt, Shva Isrei Shana, 17 years. Vayehi Yemei Yaakov Shnei Chayav, and these were the days of the life of Jacob. Shva Shanim, 7. Va'arba'im Um'at Shana, 140. Vikrevu Yimei Yisrael Lamut, and as they drew close the days of Israel to die, V'yikra livno liYosef, he called to his son Joseph. V'yomer lo, and he said, Imna matzati chen beinecha, if please I have found favor in your sight. Simna yadcha tachet yorechi, please place your hand under my thigh. Vasita imadi, and you shall alongside of me, chesed ve'emet, kindness and truth. Alna tikbereni b'Mitzrayim, please do not bury me in Egypt. This phrase, chesed ve'emet, is a phrase that I echo at graveside. And so I pause, in that this has been a week of graveside for the Rettinger and Katz families, to acknowledge for Sherry Rettinger and her father, Bert, the passing of Roz Feldman, and for Stan Katz, the passing of his mother, Blossom Katz. Chesed ve'emet, this phrase that comes out of our Torah reading, is the image that the rabbis will use for burial. It's a kindness to tend to the needs of a loved one, to participate in burial, and to do so is an act of emet, of truth. Truth, which is first understood as there is no self-interest from the departed. When one participates in burying a loved one, that person being buried cannot repay the kindness. But I would add, as I lead into teaching Vayechi and trying to link it to our own moment in time, that this quality of chesed ve'emet is what infuses imitating God. For we are told that with Moses, for instance, that it was God who helped take care of his burial. And that's at the end of the 5 books of Moses. This morning we're at the end of the first of those 5 books. And as we prepare for Jacob's passing, chesed ve'emet are the core values. Kindness and truth. And I will add, they are the 2 qualities that are identified with God. Repeatedly we are told, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, that God is a God of compassion, chesed ve'emet, of kindness and truth. Emet, truth, is one of the names that the rabbis identify as the name of God. For, ultimately, God is about relationship. And to have a relationship with God, to have a relationship with another person, is to be trustworthy. And so I turn now to the end of our Torah reading, and that is chapter 50, that I want to teach about this morning. But before I do, to give context, our Torah reading of Parsha Vayechi began in chapter 48 with a description of this awareness on Jacob's part of his impending last breath. And he calls on Joseph and he says, "Bury me when my last breath is breathed. Take me back and bury me in Canaan, in the tomb that my grandfather had purchased, and let me be at peace there." And more, our Parsha then prepares Jacob for his death by closing blessings. First, by blessing Ephraim and Manasseh, the two children of Joseph. Doing so in part because I'm now bringing myself to graveside, looking at grandchildren at graveside, great-grandchildren, is looking to the future. Those children's children are the living memorials to the person who is past or is passing. And so, first, Jacob blesses his grandsons, Joseph's sons, in that Joseph is given the role among Jacob's descendants to be the firstborn. Ephraim and Manasseh will each be given a plot of tribal territory in the Promised Land. That double portion, as it is for Joseph, is primogeniture. As it is if Joseph is the firstborn, which he is for Rachel, but of course Leah will have first sons before. And so Jacob blesses his sons, but he crosses his hands, blessing Ephraim, the second of the two, before Manasseh, and doing so to say, as he does to Joseph, "I know what I'm doing. I am being straightforward with you." And then he blesses his 12 sons, and they're not exactly sweet. The blessings of these sons, of the 10 sons, of the 11 sons, Joseph being one. Actually, he blesses Joseph too. His blessing of the 12 sons is more like prophecy, pointing out strengths and weaknesses and their future, for their future to unfold with clear eyes. Although Jacob cannot see clearly, apparently, his grandsons, he is clear-visioned in terms of where he sees his sons going and, by extension, their clans. For emet, chesed ve'emet, for there to be truth, there is kindness, and for there to be kindness, there is truth. Which now brings us to the very end, chapter 50. The last in Genesis. Vayipol Yosef al pnei aviv, and Joseph fell on the face of his father. Vayevk alav, and he cried upon him. Vayishak lo, and he kissed him. Vayitzav Yosef et avadav, and Joseph commanded his servants, et harofim, his physicians, lechanot et aviv, to embalm his father, v'yechantu harofim et Yisrael, and they so embalmed those doctors, Israel. V'yimalu lo arba'im yom, and it required 40 days, for such is the full period of embalming. The Egyptians bewailed him 70 days, and when the wailing period was over, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's court, saying, "Do me this favor, and lay this appeal before Pharaoh. My father made me swear, saying, I am about to die. Be sure to bury me in the grave which I made ready for myself in the land of Canaan." Close quote. "Now therefore let me go and bury my father, then I shall return." And Pharaoh said, "Go up and bury your father as he made you promise on oath." So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went all the officials of Pharaoh, the senior members of his court. And so they reached the burial place, and they buried him in the field of Machpelah, the field near Mamre, quote, which Abraham had bought for a burial site from Ephron the Hittite. After burying his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. And now is where the drama is our focus. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, quote, what if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong we did him? So they sent this message to Joseph. So mind you, the brothers now have participated in the burial of Jacob. They've returned to Egypt. And now they are in a panic. For they know what they have done to their brother Joseph. How so many years before they had talked about killing him and at the last moment sold him into slavery. How they had separated this brother from the family, from their father who so loved him. In the blessings that Jacob gives to his sons, which seem so filled with honesty, there is no mention of forgiving his sons for what they had done to Joseph. And the commentators pause to ask, did anybody ever tell Jacob the whole story? I continue. So the brothers, now who are in a panic, they don't go see Joseph. Oh, let me add, what has happened that they're at a distance? And now the rabbinic imagination comes into play, and they say that after Joseph had buried his father, and it was Joseph who did the burial in the rabbinic imagination, for he was the most admired, and to tend to the needs of his father, he said, I will do myself, I will not delegate. And he was so rewarded that it was Moses who would then take the bones himself of Joseph from Egypt. And so here's what the rabbis imagine. After Joseph buries his father, on the way back to Egypt, he stops off at the pit in order to, who knows what? But in their rabbinic imagination, he stands Joseph at the pit looking in, and the brothers think, oh my God, he's now reliving what we did to him. Others say he stood at the pit to recall how much his life had changed and to feel gratitude to God. But we don't know. Here's what we know. So they sent this message to Joseph. Quote, before his death, your father left this instruction. So shall you say to Joseph, quote, forgive, I urge you, the offense and the guilt of your brothers who treated you so harshly, unquote, of Jacob. Therefore, please forgive the offense of the servants of the God of your father. Full message. And Joseph was in tears as they spoke to him. Well, why is he in tears? Some say he's in tears because he's so sad that his brothers had to lie to him. There was never a conversation that would have made Jacob aware of what happened. The rabbis will say, why didn't Jacob communicate for all those years? Why didn't Joseph communicate with his father all those years? And they say it's because he did not want his father to dissociate from Joseph's other brothers. He didn't want his father to live with the rage of what they had done to deceive him. That's the key word that I'm focused on today. Chesed ve'emet, kindness and truth. He did not want his father to live with the reality of the unkindness of his brothers. He didn't want him to have to bear the truth. And Joseph was in tears as they spoke to him. His brothers went to him themselves, flung themselves before him and said, "We are prepared to be your slaves." But Joseph said to them, verse 19, "Al tira'u, do not be afraid, ki hatachat Elohim ani, for I am underneath God." Those are the same words, by the way, that Jacob said to Joseph's mother. Rachel was infertile, and she said to Jacob, "Pray for me, do something, I need a child, if not, I am like dead." And Jacob replied to her, Genesis 18, verses 12 and 13, "Ki hatachat Elohim anochi, for am I," with the capital I, anochi, the royal, God's name, "for I am under God," meaning, who am I? It is God's decree whether you are and I are blessed with child or not. And the same echo of the past now, but with a key change. Only one word, but the same meaning. Ki hatachat Elohim then was anochi. Now it's ki hatachat Elohim ani, the smaller I. What does it mean to have an echo of the past? It meant there, as Jacob said it to Rachel, I don't have the power to determine our future. And now it is used, the same words, and there are no coincidence in this elegant writing and weave. The son, born from that moment later, will say to his brothers, I have no control over my fate. It was God's determination. And then he continues, Va'atem chashavtem alai, and you thought upon me ra'ah, evil. This is so important. Chesed ve'emet. He's able to own the reality. He's not washing it over. He's saying, I know that you thought to do me evil. It's not this ignoring the past. If there is an ignoring of the past, there is no future. If there is ignoring of the past, there is no forgiveness. And so he says, verse 20, I know that you thought to do me evil, but Elohim chashva l'tova. God thought on my behalf for good. L'man aseh, in order that aso kayom hazeh, that I will have been able to do what I am doing on this day. Lachayot am rav, to enable the vitality of many people. Va'ata, and now, al tira'u, do not be afraid. Anochi achakel etchem. And again, that wordplay, because the anochi now is the royal I will sustain you. Ve'etapchem, and your children. Vaynachem otam, and he comforted them. Vaydaber al libam, and he spoke upon their heart. It wasn't only the words. I take from this it was how the words were said, that it rested on their heart. Verse 22, so Joseph and his father's household remained in Egypt. Joseph lived 110 years, which commentators say in Egyptian counting is the ideal longevity. Joseph lived to see children of the third generation of Ephraim, meaning great-grandchildren. And the last line of Genesis, V'yamat Yosef, and Joseph died, Ben mea shana ve'eser shanim, at the age of 120. V'yechantu oto, and he was so embalmed, Vayechi ba'aron b'Mitzrayim, and placed in a cabinet, in a coffin in Egypt. And that's how Genesis ends. It ends with the word Mitzrayim. It began with the word Bereshit, with a beginning pointing to what would unfold. It ends with the word B'Mitzrayim, pointing to the next words which will deal with Exodus. I'm going to pull this somewhat now together. Chesed ve'emet. Truth and kindness. The rabbis ask, when is it permitted to lie? And they are aware of a divine misstatement. You see, infertility is a problem in the Bible. It's a problem in life. And when the angels say to Sarah that she's going to have a child, but when earlier God says to Sarah, you will have a child, she laughs and she said, I'm so old, and my husband, he's too old. And later, God will say to Abraham, she didn't, when she laughed, she said, and I'm so old. And he left out the part of her saying, and my husband is so old. And from that, the rabbis say that you can hold back telling a whole story for the sake of shalom bayit, for the sake of peace. I'm going to be a few minutes. For the sake of peace, you don't have to always say everything. Interesting that to be a truth teller doesn't always mean you have to say everything, all the more if it's in the context of creating unnecessary tensions. But later the rabbis will say, if somebody comes to you and says, I'd like a loan, can you say to them, I don't have the money. If I had the money, I'd give you the loan. And the reason you don't want to give them the loan is because you don't trust them. And the rabbis say, you can't do that. That's lying. You got to say it. When you look to the future, you got to tell it straight. In order for there to be a future, the past has to be owned, although not all necessarily needs to be said. On this January 2nd, we're looking forward. There's a heaviness in my heart, and more, there's at times rage in my heart over lies. I keep in my office at home 2 objects to remind me of when I've been gullible. I can be gullible. Who can't be? One is a necklace that I bought with Linda in Morocco in a small town. And it had a khamsa on it, and I thought it was an antique. And I'm always looking for remarkable objects of the past. And as I began to negotiate for it, he started at such a high price. And as I kept getting him lower and lower, I got more and more sucked in to think this was really a valuable thing and that I was smarter than him because I'm Jewish and I knew that these khamsas may have been part of the old Jewish community of Morocco. And so I bought this object, this necklace, for Linda, and then later discovered that I was the one who had been tricked. You see, I thought I was smarter than him. I thought I was smarter than the seller because I could know that this was a Jewish antiquity. But he has more than one Jewish customer. I hadn't paused to think about that. He has seen a lot of Jewish customers, even though it was a out-of-the-way place, which is to say I got conned. And I asked Linda, because it was more for its symbolic value as an antique that we had bought it, if I could hang it up in my office at home. She said, sure. So it hangs there. as one of more than one object to remind me of when I have been fooled. How and when do I get fooled? I get fooled when I get greedy. I get fooled when I allow wishful thinking and hubris. See, in that moment, I thought I was smarter than that guy, but I was not. I tricked myself. I could go on, but I won't. About lies and self-deception that have made a huge, now you feel the rage, difference in our nation. Letting go of 2020 is not letting go of the horror of COVID. I have a wise brother, my brother Mark, he's a neurologist. He told me how busy he has been reading EEGs for COVID patients. And he says, people, when they watch the news, they think about COVID as an either-or situation. How many people got it and how many people died? He said, that's really silly. He said, it's like car accidents. You don't think of how many people had car accidents and how many died. The reality is when you have a car accident, significant number of people are physically injured. And for a long time will have problems with their neck, problems with their body, let alone the material damage to their cars. He said, what does not get reported enough is the impact of COVID on people's brains, on their lungs, on their heart, on the ongoing problem of, he says, I can only guess, but 1 out of 5 people who get COVID will have enduring physical damage. Wishful thinking keeps people from wearing masks. I don't see it, it's not there. Selfishness, stupidity. Okay, I won't allow myself to let go. Chesed ve'emet. Let's pull it back together, I say to myself. Chesed ve'emet means that for there to be kindness, there needs to be truth. Not everything needs to be said of the past. One must speak of the past with an eye to the future. Hence, there is reason not to overly vent. But what is true is that looking forward into 2020, we have to take care of ourselves. And that means not only by wearing masks, it means not only by being careful, but it also means seeing the world clearly. Knowing that there are truth tellers and there are liars. And the liars can lie to themselves. Extreme narcissists can pass a polygraph test. They believe their lies. And I say that as a category. I have had personal experience with extreme narcissists, Teflon. But I'm looking forward. Forward means chesed ve'emet, kindness and truth. To do for others, not to expect anything in return, is to be engaged in chesed ve'emet. As we enter 2020, this is the second day of Rosh Hashanah. There is still deep reflection and yet, hopefully, celebration of a time in which we get vaccines because of the ingenuity of our human community, of the skill of our scientists. Know that there are genuine scientific discoveries, and there is nonsense based on wishful thinking. And I am upset, and therefore, pulling it back in, reminded that in looking back, one must let go sometimes for the sake of Shalom Bayit. For the sake of being an American community, we must look forward and take a lesson from God. We don't need to be reminded of mistakes and even lies of the past. We need to look forward to find the goodness in each other and to forgive. But as we look forward, we must do so without wishful thinking. We must do so with hope. And hope is different. Hope is to know what's possible when people do what's right. Hope is the awareness that things will get better. And so now I pull it together. As Jacob draws us to the end of Genesis, and this, the beginning of a new year, we are reminded that life is a journey. And we are reminded that Jacob's own journey was toward truth-telling. He was Yaakov, the one who would go roundabout, who deceived his brother, who deceived his father to get the blessing, but became Yisrael, the one who could be Yashar-el, straight with God. And in the end, in our Torah reading today, as grandfather, as father, he tells it straight. Ribono Shel Olam, may we tell it straight, but with hope. May we be a community that comes together, looking forward with kindness and truth. Amen.